My name is Tom Harrell. I was part My name is Tom Harrell. I was partner and owner operator WSTP and WRDX in Salisbury, North Carolina from October 1956 until May of 1995. It was a great ride. What follows is my story. Well, we've talked about various aspects of the people at the radio station through the years that I was charged with the responsibility of operating, and I had two partners who decided after about 3 years in Salisbury that they needed to move on. Primarily their wives were unhappy with the community. They felt like that they had lost stature as owners, that they had greater stature and possibilities as employees at other places, and that's one of the reasons why they left. Along the way, the people in the sales department played an ever important role. Whenever we bought the radio station, my two partners, Ted Austin was a programmer, Jack Eichner was an engineer, and I was the salesman. And I held that role as salesman for several years. I inherited a fellow by the name of Joe Brown. Joe Brown was a part-time salesman announcer at the radio station when we bought it, not I, when we bought it in 1956. Over the years, I had to cut back because there were other management roles, things like license renewal, hiring people, all of those things. Sorry.
That's okay.
All of those things played a role in something called management. And so eventually I hired a man by the name of Frank Andrews. Frank was a graduate of Catawba College, and he had won the Wall Street Journal Award in Dr. Millard Wilson's class. And so we worked out an understanding, and he came to work at the radio station with one proviso, and that is he would be in charge of sales, not me. I agreed to that, and it was a good move, but it also was a bad move in the sense that I should never have left the street. I think I would have been more effective had I spent more time on the street and moved other people into more management positions. That's after the fact. That's another thing you think about after you see what the results were of what you did. Frank Andrews was a very effective salesman for a number of years. And after Frank moved on, there were several people that came through, some of them very quick, very temporary. But one fellow that came and stuck was Earl Carney, who had been working for a daytimer in Statesville. And Earl was a guy who went on the street. And eventually, Earl and I worked out an understanding that we would add some people. And we added Cary Grant. And Cary had a background in various things, but he'd been active as a JC member. He was very effective as a salesman with training and is still working in sales now in real estate. Don Ludwig had been working for J.C. Penney, and Don did not want to be transferred up the line of J.C. Penney, so we sat down and got to know him through my dentist. Our common connection was Dr. Wade Henson, who told me that he was looking for work and he knew I was looking for somebody, and so Don Ludwig came, and Don Ludwig and Cary Grant were the mainstays of the radio station sales department until we developed the big FM, WRDX. And then my bankers started telling me that I had to have a presence in Charlotte, and that they thought that I needed to find somebody who understood the Charlotte market. So while Ludwig was sales manager, because I didn't want to take Grant off the street, he was better on the street than he would be anywhere else, in my opinion, and I left him on the street, and I think his production vindicated that decision. Well, I hired the hotshot, and I don't guess I ought to say hotshot and mention his name, from one of the big stations in Charlotte, and he sat around waiting for the phone to ring because he wanted to take people to lunch and sign a contract for advertising. But the people that he was dealing with wanted numbers. They wanted a Charlotte radio station. They wanted somebody that could take them to lunch very often. We created an office in the Cotswold Tower in Charlotte and put him in it. And not too less than a year, we reached an understanding. That didn't turn out. Then I hired the best man out of Winston-Salem, and he also just simply never connected with the format and a station which was not in the major market city. Then I hired the best guy in Charlotte who had the best record. And the best thing that he brought to the station was, let's stop calling it X106, it's time to call it Beach 106. All the time through all of these years, there are certain people who stand out. First employee of the radio station I'm married to today, Sylvia Wiseman. When I thought we needed some additional help in 1958, 58, both my partners said, look, we'll share the load, we'll do more of the work, let's give us a pay raise. I said, well, since I have the voting control, I'm going to say no. We need more help. And so our first disagreement came over the employment of Sylvia Wiseman. But along the way, there were some other people that played important roles in the design of the studios. Bob Bailey. Bob Bailey runs his own business here in town now, Quick Copy Shop. Bob was very instrumental in the design of the studios and the layout that you still see at the radio station to this day. That was unique in that he knew enough about woodworking to build all of the music files that you find still there. I think most of them are there. The desks that were built in were designed and built by Bob Bailey, but he was also program director. Now that evolved into operations as the station got more complex, and Phil Kerr did a different kind of job, although both of them were held accountable for covering the airship if somebody didn't show up. There were a lot of people who played roles, and to sit down now and try to remember out of all of the, as I said earlier, some 400 people that worked there over the 40 years I ran the station, I find it difficult to do. I'm struggling with names that were important, and I'm sure that I have missed some. Some I have forgotten. Not long ago I had a call from a man who was running a small group of radio stations in Florida. I think he said he was in charge of 4 stations, and he had formed a company that had bought the controlling interest in the 4 stations. He said, do you remember me? And I said, yeah, I remember you. I fired you. And then he said this. He said, the day you fired me, I went home to get my gun because I was going to come back and shoot you. My mother didn't stop me, but my father showed up in time, and he told me, no, you're not going to do anything that stupid. He said, I want to tell you that that turned my life around, because I have never forgotten what you did to me, and I've never forgotten when I've done it to some of the people who worked for me. He just had to tell me that firing him turned out to be the best thing for him, because it forced him to rethink what he was trying to do with his life. He wasn't the great talent that he thought he was, and he had found himself now as manager and part owner of a small group of radio stations in Florida. One of the people that I haven't mentioned up to this point is a fellow by the name of Bill Henderson. Bill Henderson was a unique announcer. Bill had gone to school at Pfeiffer College before it became Pfeiffer University, and he was a drama student there. I didn't know that for the longest kind of time because he never bothered to tell me that when he applied for the job. He'd been working for a radio station in Augusta, Georgia, and I knew that he had to be pretty good because that was a tough radio market. He wanted to come home because his parents lived in Kannapolis, and his father, as I recall, was ill, and he wanted to be closer to his mother because she was going to need him, in his view. Bill was a unique individual in that he did things long before other announcers ever thought of it. He did the morning show, and I have people still telling me all these years, and he's been away from the radio station now, and Bill died last year at age 70. But Bill had the skills and ability to understand what he was doing. And the thing that I had to understand about him is as long as he was on the air, I was going to get a big telephone bill. This was in the day when you made station-to-station calls was one thing, but to get who you wanted to talk to, you had to make a person-to-person call. At the same time, Larry Bruton was doing the news, and the two of them would hatch all these wild things, but especially Henderson because he executed them. Henderson decided one day that he wanted to speak to Phyllis Diller. Now, you have to remember, he was on the air from 5:30 in the morning, I believe, until 9. And so when he came in at 5:30 in the morning, he started calling clubs where he thought Phyllis Diller may be working in, I think it was Las Vegas. And he finally found Phyllis Diller. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning, wherever he found her, and 6 o'clock in the morning in Salisbury. And she turned out to be the most gracious interview you will ever. She was astonished that somebody on a radio station was trying to locate her. It wasn't that she'd never had anything like that happen before, but she never had anybody call her at 3 o'clock in the morning for an interview. She had just finished up a cabaret show or whatever she was in, and I think it was in Las Vegas. And she was, as I said, a charming individual, and she gave Bill an interview that I've heard people comment on until 2 or 3 years ago. He did another thing one day. He called up the Russian embassy in Washington, and he got a hold of a guy who spoke very good English, and he demanded to know why they had built some obstruction on the path between the American sector and the Russian sector, through the Russian sector, which walled off people in Berlin, as I recall it. And when he wasn't satisfied with the answer, he wanted to get whoever was running Russia at the time. I don't know what his name was. I have no idea what the premier of Russia was. But Henderson wanted to know how to reach him because he said, "You're not giving me a satisfactory answer." And the guy was quite flustered because he was not able to just brush off Bill Henderson. He was asking very pointed questions. But he did things like that long before it became a common thing that DJs, announcers do today. Henderson in that sense was quite unique. But one day, he came into my office when he got off the air and he said, "I want to quit." I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I'm burned out." I'd never heard the phrase before. He says, "I'm tired, I'm burned out." He said, "This has been a fun job for the last 10 or 12 years, but it's no longer fun anymore, and I want to quit. I said, well, it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I said, well, let's go to lunch and talk about it. We went to the Holiday Inn and got an early lunch, and we sat there for probably 2-3 hours talking about what had happened to him. I was trying to understand, because